All right, so quick setup here, folks. I was a speaker today, kind of, setting up some networking breakout sessions for IndieCade Horizons. If you don't know about IndieCade Horizons, IndieCade, of course, is a festival that helps celebrate sometimes students, sometimes early, sometimes emergent, experimental. Part of what I love about IndieCade, and it's got a very particular niche that is in the industry, is I've seen it celebrate a lot of games that they may not be highlighted, maybe not yet, by something like GDC, IGF, by something like Steam's, some of the traditional kind of categories that focus on polish or assume things are already customer ready. A lot of conceptually interesting things, emergent things are what I've appreciated seeing. Horizons is like the collegiate scale version of what IndieCade does. It's fully online, just happened today. And because of that, for a lot of them, it might be their first time at kind of a games event or games networking situation. So I explained it to them, and this is where it kind of was two different segments, each about 5 or 6 minutes, with some different points each time. I'm going to, at the end of this recording, I recorded the first part just locally, so nobody else is captured in it. Just me, probably about 6 minutes talking from the first part. I did want to throw some additional points that I brought up in the second half that I did not get a recording of, so I can pass along to you as well, right? As part of my deal is if I'm ever doing free speaking for a school, for an event, for whatever, well, I'm going to also share it with all out there to anybody else who's curious to hear it. A lot of my value in my career to nonprofits, to schools, to game studios, to students, to whoever I'm training, etc., has been from the networking that I've done, right? Very, very proactively. Been, I think, 7 years at GDC, been, 10-ish times to IndieCade, I don't know if you're counting IndieCade East and IndieCade Europe and whatever. But so it is a lot of these kind of events, and that's often, it's expensive, it's inconvenient. I find ways to try to do it as affordably as I can, but that's part of its investment in is not just trying to network for myself, but trying to network for everyone I've ever met and everyone I haven't met yet. And so this is, I think, a valuable lens to take into networking, that you're not just looking for who do I need right now, but rather, how can I learn enough about this person that if I run into someone else who needs to meet them, I can recall and hook and connect them to, here's someone else who might be an answer to your question. And what I like about this, it massively increases the surface area of, instead of going to a networking event and feeling like, okay, well, I think the example I used in the kind of later recorded segment, maybe I'm an artist, I'm looking for an art gig, I can't find someone looking for an art gig, darn, I kind of regret that I waste my time going to that event. If instead I go there and I'm looking for who can I help connect, who can I understand the work of, and so on, A, people appreciate being listened to, so that's already, you're on a better foot there. But B, honestly, it's a case too where I come back feeling successful because I've got more people now that I can help introduce to each other that have added value for their lives, including then every other networking event I go to, right? Think about this. I'm bringing with me everyone else I've already met before. I hope that there's someone in my Pokedex who I can introduce them to that's going to be a good match for, they need a collaborator, they need somebody who's a certain fit for a situation, question they're running into. I look out for those constantly. I'm also taking notes on it. It's also where it's okay, especially I find this easier in a Zoom environment than on a phone. But if you're comfortable Googling the person, pulling up if they're public socials, if they have a portfolio online, etc., checking out their work, also it helps me kind of hook into my brain, this person's the one who did this kind of thing. And from the other side to this, right, if you don't quite yet have a public presence of some form, and everyone's different in their level of comfort of how public or private they want to feel, that's okay. Which filter they want to put on what's public. But it is going to be kind of curatorial about what is it you want to present out there, so they do have something to find. So you're in control of that message versus there being nothing to point them towards. So for example, too, at the end of today, first one group showed this really, really cool game he's working on. It was neat to see, but he didn't yet have an email list we could sign up for. He didn't yet have a page with updates. Didn't have a way to sign up for a wish list or anything. So it's just kind of like, well, I guess if this crosses my line of sight in the future, I'll hear about it. But there wasn't really a way to attach to it. And that sort of attachment is also going to see, and this is where everyone's got different uses about how they use their connections on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or B-Sky or Instagram, you name it, whatever platforms people are using these days, Discords and so on. So not everyone's going to be equally comfortable at accepting that connection. And I say this because to not feel snubbed if you send a LinkedIn request and someone doesn't accept it. So just as an example, I don't know if it's a humble brag, it's just the fact of the matter. I have a high volume of LinkedIn requests that come in from total strangers because they saw me on Udemy, they saw me on YouTube, they heard the podcast, they've heard that I did something. Basically, we're both on the internet. I can't accept a LinkedIn request on the basis that we're both on the internet, in part because other people I've known for my decades in industry turn to me to ask, oh, I see you're connected to such and such. Can you give me an introduction? Can you vouch for this person? Can you vet that this is a reasonable person to work for? In various ways, I can't speak to that if it's a total stranger. So that's a bar, right? Or also, like, I'm part-time an educator at Northeastern currently, and I've had students who've made requests on LinkedIn. And again, different instructors, some professors, I'm not technically a professor, but different instructors have different attitudes about it. And so, for example, my bar is, if I've known this person from outside the classroom, I'm much more open to it. If I only know a person because they were in my class and I was their instructor on record, no, that's kind of, to me, not a meaningful way to do it because I can't really triangulate. If I've also seen them at other industry meetups in the area, if they were at IndieCade Horizons, If I have encountered them just in the general scene and at Zoom meetups and other stuff, sure, that makes it a little more easy. Anyway, just to clarify, do not feel bad if you send a request and don't get accepted. Again, people use their filters different ways. That said, it is important where possible. Can you maintain a connection, a link, a way to find or reach this person? Because in order to operate on the point I brought up earlier about can I introduce this person to someone else who needs their help, well, you got to have a way to message them. Part of what you're hopefully fishing for is someone who our lives might continue to intersect, right? Some way we've kept a thread to each other. Not necessarily we're not leaving best friends. We still don't know each other that well, but that I've got a spot in my brain for who you are, what you do, what you're about, what kind of challenges, what kind of things you're aiming for, and a way I could find you if there's a reason I come up and I meet somebody else the next day and they're describing exactly what you're doing. Like, oh my God, you're both doing like projector games. And maybe that's still a terrible fit, but I can at least try to ask, would you like an introduction? Potentially there's some life-changing introductions to people. Those help people out. All right, a few other points, then I want to get to the recorded part so we can kind of just keep this again kind of light. One of the value of going to events like talks, for example, and so we had a keynote right before this. It was Heart Machine. It was Alex and I think Yi of that team. And, that was an IndieCade finalist in 2014, back with Hyperlight Drifter. And now talking about Breaker and the cool work that's been going on in the studio. But part of what's good about going to talks is that it gives you kind of a shared common foundation of thing to talk about, right? It's like part of why people date by going to a movie is they can walk out and talk about the movie. They have a shared reference frame. And without something in common of the thing we all just saw to talk about, it can be a little bit harder to navigate. We do totally different skill disciplines. We have watched different shows. We have different interests, different hobbies. All right. If nothing else, right, as a fallback, you often can kind of start from you clearly probably have games in common to some degree. Even that's not always a given, though. And this is where, in being mindful about, and this is something I see a lot of people come into it with some challenges, and I still work with this on myself a little bit, is being mindful of not taking up too much space or time talking about ourselves and our work. We can be excited about it. Sometimes we're just frankly nervous. We kind of know what to say. We kind of start fumble or struggle or kind of hit it from two different angles. Trying to be mindful of catching yourself. And don't feel bad or guilty about it. It happens to a lot of different people. But try to make sure you're making space for, like, we haven't heard from, you in a while. Do you mind, what are your thoughts on this? Or kind of throw a question your way. Creating space for others is important, in part because it allows you to listen to what they have to say, which a couple of things to keep in mind about the listening to what they're having to say is, A, it's going to equip you, right, to, again, keep in mind how can I help this person down the road, potentially, in a really beneficial way for them. But also, by listening, you got a much better sense for which side of yourself to surface or forefront. Almost everybody knowing games, almost without exception, is many-skilled. Touches a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different experience, a lot of different interests, all kinds of things you could focus on. But if I hear that there's a certain thing based on your background, your focus, your goals, your company size, whatever, that might adjust what version of myself I've put forefront in terms of what I emphasize. And that's, if nothing else, a strategic thing. If I say, well, I could do all kinds of stuff, it's really hard to get a secondary referral off that to somebody else in their network. If instead I say, I'm able to fix a very certain kind of situation, right? I help people finish the first several games with teams. I help people finish the first bigger projects than jams. Those are two facts that people can remember about me. When they hear that, they're like, oh man, someone has this problem. Chris is the answer to the problem. Can I also be a producer on a team? Yes, I have. Can I also do technical game design or level design? Sure, professionally have. But depending on who I'm talking to, there's different lenses I'm going to surface or focus on first. All right, and then just last two, and then I'm going to run the recording of my first bit that covers some of those points. Might even have an echo or two. First of all, even though obviously you want to legitimately try to be friends with people, right? You're not just there trying to get something out of them or even just try to give something to them. It's not privilege. Actually, you do want to be reasonable and friendly and kind to people. But it is a thing that in a professional networking context, it is a little bit different to navigate that than if you're just hanging out with friends. And an example of this that I see all the time, right? Someone will go to an IGDA meetup in their city, or they'll be out at GDC at a table or something. They'll sit down with somebody, they'll talk to somebody, and they'll feel kind of like stuck. Like they got to follow that person around. Like that's now their one contact that they have and they got to hold on to. In many cases, that may not be the best fit for either of you. And in a professional networking setting, it's entirely appropriate to be like, I'm going to switch tables, or, it's a great meeting, I'm going to continue to mingle. Those are okay things to do. And so to keep in mind that is part of navigating that, where it allows me to have far more conversations out of going to one of these events than if I just sort of like spend the whole time kind of got what we had to say to each other with somebody else, which nothing wrong with this human being. It's often a matter of fit. And while it is true that quality is more important than quantity, in many cases, especially earlier in career where you haven't yet been on the other side of the quantity to find what are the quality fits for the kind of things that are relevant to, again, you, your network, your circles, of which there's plenty of other great people who are doing good work, valid thoughts, perfectly fine experiences, who just aren't quite as much of in alignment with what it is that you're doing. In which case, again, you kind of, I want to say this crude, getting out of their way can free them up to as well to continue to explore and find a better connection to match for what it is that they're seeking. The last thing I want to throw in there, and this is something that is more of a plea than it is a tip for networking, is I've seen a lot of folks who early in their career when they're students and trying to break into industry and trying to transition from another field, really hit hard the networking events, right? They go to the IGD meetups, they go to the local things, they travel for events and so on. as soon as they find a job, they kind of stop being present at those events kind of at all. They kind of wither away or disappear. And the challenge with that, and I appreciate people make the trade-offs and time and pressure and stress in their life. But the problem is, right, when you're on the other side of that, when you're newer, gosh, you really find it valuable when some mid-career people are there. And even if it's a few, what a difference it can make. And so just to kind of plant a seed in the back of your mind there, hoping that you'll help be one of these people who continue to show up at these events, even as you're a mid-late career, helping try to give back, talk, share perspective, be part of that scene, and people will appreciate you being there. And this is also where, and maybe, I hate to put kind of a self-serving lens during a dark time, but is maybe, if nothing else, a weight in favor of what's hopefully a good decision to do anyway. It's also the case that when folks wind up in these massive layoffs of, again, we're not sugarcoating anything here, what is it, 15,000, 16,000 in the past year alone in the general game industry, entertainment space. One of the things that happens is that the folks who are still out there actively networking, they tend to have the advantage, right, in terms of the opportunities, finding a fit for them that are the best match for what they're looking for soonest, because they continue networking versus feeling like, okay, well, I got a good gig, so why bother, right? Why continue to do that? What is it, like an hour a month, an hour every quarter, 1 or 2, outings a year potentially. Every little bit makes a difference for other people and might make a difference for you too. Maintain those connections. Anyway, I'm going to, again, kind of close this out. We're going to play the 6 minutes from the other recorded session. There was a few points I brought up here. I didn't bring up as much in the other one. I want to surface those. But anyway, hope you find ways to continue to network, to grow, to improve yourself. Oh, actually, one point I want to throw in there as well, because this is a huge point where, so again, Alex Preston, who was like the keynote speaker, was being interviewed about his experience, and part he did was he was one of the founding people of Glitch City, this like indie arts game group in the greater Los Angeles area, big part of the community out there in the LA scene, and where a lot of my background is a community builder as well, for a couple of college clubs, for now home team game dev, for the different kind of things I've done in my business. Part of why community building is so important is because of the strength in numbers. If we have 50 people who are all looking out for each other, what a difference that makes versus a bunch of people kind of individually, it's kind of shouting over each other about their respective totally different things. It's not got the same, again, surface areas way to think about it, of network of who really knows each other's experience and understands and work together in some even secondary way to have a sense for, like, I could recommend this person, I can vouch for this person, I can write an endorsement for this person. Those come from community building. And one of the reasons why our early career connections, in my case, became more valuable was in some of the cases we helped each other become more valuable connections, right? It wasn't just a matter of we were in the right place at the right time around each other. It was that, how can I help them? How can they help me? We can all help push each other forward. We're not in competition. We're in cooperation with each other. All right, anyway, I'm going to get the recording. Probably my voice is getting shot at this point with too many hours of this stuff. Here's the networking bit from earlier in the day. This part was live against the audience and indicates there's some reference to breakout rooms. Obviously, it's not happening here. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. And here is the last part to close on what, again, was the intro for the other networking session. Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris DeLeon, teaching on the internet these days independently, but zigzaggy, time in industry, making games since 1997, professional since 2005, involved with IndieCade since 2007 as a volunteer, finalist in 2010, helped organize speakers for several years. Lots of ways over the years. IndieCade's been really helpful in my life, so I'm happy you're all here. I got involved before Horizons, and I was so happy when Horizons got to be a thing. But the reason why this networking stuff is going on, this is super important to me at all events, whether it's IndieCade or other festivals and conferences you go to, right? The real value, I think of it this way. The first person I met going to GDC 2005 was David Perry. And like, the person made Earthworm Jim and MDK's games I was really impressed with as a child. But in talking to him, I realized I didn't need to talk to who David Perry was, 5-10 years after he did really cool stuff. I need to talk to who else was in the room that was going to be on that stage in 5 or 10 years. And that's where it's more often the valuable networking, right, is talking to your peers, your other people coming up in the same cohort, fellow college students, fellow people also getting their footing into entry-level roles, where it's also been a case where the highest, and it can sound like a crass way to put it, but the highest value contacts I have for introductions, for finding people roles, etc., are people who we met each other before either of us had done significant things. Where as soon as people have crossed some career inflection point, and it takes a different form for different people in their paths, it's much harder to make a break into knowing that person, trusting in the same way as they liked me before they had a reason to think they were going to get something out of it. One of the ones that's been really helpful for me in networking, as to I think some people, and it's instinctive, it's natural, it makes sense, is that they'll go into an environment looking for what suits my needs right now. It's, again, I can't blame them, that makes sense. But the problem with that is the odds of finding a hit are so low, it's very frustrating and discouraging. You go to any event, you're like, well, I'm looking for a music gig, no one needs a musician right now, I'm sad. Instead, my lens for all networking throughout my life, which has helped me and helped a lot of other people, is I'm trying to find people who I might be able to connect to somebody else who I may not even know yet. So suddenly the surface area of who I'm trying to listen to and understand is basically everybody, because I may not need a musician, but I don't know if next week, next month, next year, I'm going to talk to somebody who needs a very particular kind of work done, and I can then crawl through my LinkedIn contacts or Facebook connections or Instagram or Twitter or wherever I have them and be like, you should talk to. Jess seems like a reasonable human being who really kind of focuses in this area. And that only happens from listening to others and realizing that part of our lens is, again, who can I introduce to others? Also ultimately helps you out too. People like those referrals. It helps them out as well. It's not the only reason to do these things. But part of the lens that goes back to all of these is you really have to be nice to everybody, right? Because you don't know who is the relevant connection later. You don't necessarily know who's going to do the important stuff, which is not the only reason to be nice to people. But I also want to acknowledge, for a lot of people, it is a trade-off of cost and time, going to events, taking a stressful all-day thing on, it would have been a weekend, a trip, a week, whatever, to do these things for our career. So it's an okay lens to bring. Now, for that matter, too, it is also a useful thing to keep in mind for networking, same way as applying to jobs, same way as marketing or sales. And I say that only through the lens of there's a very low hit rate, even if you're doing it right? You can't go in there expecting 100% of the people you meet or talk to, or it's going to, if I do all the right things and if I present myself well, it's all going to be a match. It often won't be. And you just can't stress or sweat that. It's got to be, again, sounds like a crass way to put it, a little bit of a numbers game of there's this whole thing in sales. If, 1 in 10 people I talk to are a constructive lead in any sense for my business, and I need 3, then I got to talk to 30 people as opposed to just how do I get 3 out of 10 isn't realistic. And any given person you talk to, and they may not be the match for what you can think of right now, but you're trying to listen across the field for who else, what are they looking for, what directions are they going? And that's where it all makes it much more interesting of you kind of collecting your Pokemon of sorts. I think some people take the lens to events where they'll kind of go, they'll have a fun time, like going to a concert. Oh, I'm glad I went. It was a good time. But they're realizing, or they're missing the point that really part of what you're fishing for, in the sense of, again, you may not come up with any fish that day, but that's part of the game, is are there any lasting connections where for years to come, we might recognize each other as mutuals on B-Sky. They may or may not be comfortable depending how they use LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever, accepting a contact. To not take it personally, not necessarily snubbing you or anything. People have different ways to use those networks. But if it is someone who you do find a way to connect with them in a way that you both feel comfortable with, can be really a way to maintain that thread. So like just yesterday, I literally was having a conversation with somebody who I met 15 years ago about someone else who I knew from 8 years ago, because there was a good alignment there that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have an easy way to reach both. And one of the frustrating challenges being the alumni lead currently for IndieCade is different people have different platforms they want to be on. And if you kind of swear off the whole thing of like, well, I don't want to use Instagram, I don't want to be on LinkedIn, I don't want to whatever, that's okay. You can make that choice. But you're also kind of swearing off an entire potentially age demographic field of specialization. We're like, yeah, but a lot of the artists use this platform, or a lot of sort of the people of a different generation are on that platform. And it becomes that much harder to kind of make or maintain a connection to how do we reach that person because they haven't checked Facebook in 10 years, but that person will respond to a message on a certain, Slack, Discord, etc. The last thing I want to bring up is sort of a micro example before we split into breakout rooms. My favorite recruiter in the industry, Christy Stoll, she was an IndieCade speaker in 2016. She's the one who got me into EA longer ago. She was also Activision Blizzard lead and so on. She liked to tell the story of basically the number of human beings on this earth who can move the polygons where they need them to go or write the code that does what they need to do are plentiful, abundant in terms of at the skill level they need. Those people exist. The challenge for a recruiter or anyone, and also finding partners, collaborators, whatever, is the sliver of those people that really everyone's excited to work with every single day, wants to be around, finds personable, cooperative, friendly, understanding, reasonable. Those are the things that are equally, if not more important in some ways than the skill. And the story she used to illustrate this was, I think they interviewed 8 animators for a job at some small studio early in her career. And everyone on the team was like, we really want Jess. And she was like, it's very obvious. She's the least skilled animator. They're like, we'll help her figure out animation. We want to spend every day around Jess. And that, for me, was a helpful lens on how I approach my industry work, my networking, and talking to other people. I'll end on that because it's already been 6 minutes. I want to let y'all talk to each other again. That's the most valuable thing you can be doing. So now one of our IndieCade official mod people will be breaking you into boggle rooms, 10 minutes-ish, potentially. And then probably another shuffle after 10. So if you're not feeling the room you're in, I don't want to say wait it out, but you'll have another chance to meet different people in another 10.